Hello, I'm your host, Abby Feltham, and you are listening to the New Beginnings podcast, a series for women experiencing gambling harms and for anyone who would like to learn and know more about the issue. New Beginnings is brought to you by Bet No More UK gambling support charity, providing peer-led services, including our women's-only programme, New Beginnings, as part of the National Gambling Support Network. To find out more, please visit our website, www.betnomoreuk.org. Whether you're listening as an individual who has been affected by gambling harms, someone who feels it is getting out of hand, or you're a concerned family member or friend, don't worry, this is a safe space. Today's topic and stories shared will have details of gambling harms, mentions of various forms of harm and addiction, and scenarios that some listeners may find triggering. If this is you, please contact the free National Gambling Helpline on 0808 8020 133 for 24/7 support. Today's episode is all about the taboo of women's health. The topic of women's health is a broad category which includes topics such as menstruation, pregnancy, and menopause. Now, while this has and always will be our journey, we tend to have a deal with it attitude rather than recognize the huge impact it has on every aspect of our lives, especially when we talk about women's health and addiction. On today's episode, we have two incredible women who work on behalf of women, helping address their issues with gambling harms. My first guest is Harp Edwards. Hi, Harp.
Hi.
Hi, it's so nice to meet you. Thank you for joining me. You're the residential manager for women's service at Gordon Moody. I'm interested, how did you get into your role?
I think my getting into my role was a bit of a journey for me, to be honest. I worked in a lot of different kind of industries, but ultimately they all kind of led back to gambling, which was really bizarre. And obviously, you know, I saw this job come up. I'd already done a number of years working with individuals with gambling addictions, but on an outreach kind of individual psychotherapy basis rather than in a residential. So it was something I thought that was, you know, would be amazing to give the opportunities of women to actually deal with their gambling related harms, but in a kind of a controlled manner, where we take the chaos from everyday life away, and we can actually really focus on, you know, their relationships with gambling, their views of gambling, you know, their triggers, their urges, their trauma. So yeah, that was me. And I started this program in November 2021.
Amazing. And also joining me is Bianca Colclough, who is the founder of This Girl, which is an online and in-person network for women to learn and talk about issues that have and will affect their lives, as well as a space to be unapologetically themselves. This sounds incredible, Bianca. How did this come about?
Hi, Abby. Thank you. So I have worked successfully in a career for more than 20 years. And I always felt when I was at work that the people around me, particularly the women, wore a mask. I feel that we all wear one to an extent anyway, but when we look at our social media platforms and profiles, they quite often portray a very different image of the person we actually are. So I was very keen psychologically to uncover the areas of women's lives where maybe their workplace hasn't given them the platform or space to talk more about things that have affected our lives through trauma, through life experience, through relationships, health. So I actually did more of a social experiment really during lockdown to try and get a group of professional women together to identify a little bit more about how they were feeling, but not just right in the present moment, if there was things that had affected them. And I was astonished at how many things I found out about women during that conversation, that I'd known these women for a long, long time and actually didn't know a lot of the personal journeys that they'd gone through. So that made me become fiercely passionate to want to change the way women are perceived in the workplace, but also to show that in sharing my story, I can give women the confidence to feel not judged by sharing their own. And that's where we are 4 years later.
Incredible. Harp, why do you feel that Or why do you think that women's health in 2023 is still a taboo subject, especially when we're talking about things like gambling harms?
I think a lot of the women that we have come through our service, when it comes to gambling and their physical health, so the physiological effects of gambling, they are not really aware of what gambling can do to your health. Equally, there's a lot of things around the hormonal changes and hormonal effects of behaviour that a lot of women struggle with when it comes to their gambling. And that's something that we haven't really, it isn't really out there. Like the awareness isn't kind of out there. So I think a lot of the women we have, whilst they're in treatment, we kind of, we have to look at their health, and we have to look at their physical health, their mental health, their, hormonal changes, and we kind of make the connections around, the impacts that this has on their behaviours and their gambling.
What are kind of some of the health concerns or issues that might be contributing to gambling harms?
So a lot of their health issues, physical health issues, are things around their kind of mobility issues. So we have a lot of women that come through the service that might suffer with things like fibromyalgia, which is what we're seeing a lot more of. And we also have a lot of women that come through service who deal with a lot of stress related issues. So whether this is skin issues, whether this is issues with their kind of weight, whether this is issues with hormones, a lot of them are stress related issues. And what we see here is the impact that, dealing with kind of their gambling whilst they're in recovery here in treatment, the positive impacts it has on their health. We also have kind of like a holistic approach where we look at sleep. Sleep's a massive issue that we have with ladies that are obviously struggling with gambling related harms, poor kind of eating patterns, and poor kind of day-to-day kind of patterns, like constantly staying in bed, not getting out, the isolation, which obviously in turn, if you're not physically active, it can impact your body. So that's quite a lot of what we see, but we also see quite a lot of mental health issues, a lot of ladies suffering with depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, confidence issues, low worth, which is everything that we kind of deal with on site and what we try and focus in our psychoeducational sessions so that we can support women to kind of feel a lot better about themselves, kind of empower them to take charge of their physical and mental health again.
It's so important for us to be able to kind of connect the dots and kind of connect our health concerns or what might be going on with our bodies to our behaviours, especially when it comes to things like gambling harms. Bianca, off the back of that, is that kind of why you would say this girl is kind of needed?
Yeah, so I mean, for myself personally, I shared my story in 2019 publicly about my historic experience of being a victim of childhood trauma. It was something I'd kept to myself. I'd not shared it, and I didn't realise psychologically how much of my personality had been shaped by my childhood traumas that I'd experienced, and also keeping it secret. So it came to no surprise when I started to explore myself as a woman, that if there was ever going to be an addiction that I'd stepped into and become a victim of, it was going to be gambling, because of the secrecy behind it and the links between my childhood trauma and my gambling. My gambling addiction spanned over 12 years, and it was a complete secret. It was something I lived with. I was able to function completely normally as a human being because I was already conditioned from a very young age to be secretive and harbour secrets because of my trauma. So for me, when I decided to share my story around gambling related harm, it was much later in life. So there was a lot of shame and stigma attached to it for me as a woman, because I actually found it easier to speak about my childhood trauma because I could disassociate of that being me because, oh, that was me when I was a little girl, whereas this is me now. So when I spoke about this on my platform as this girl, but also through my own journey, I was shocked at just how many other women, those that I knew, but also those that I didn't, that came forward to me and said, look, Bianca, I've experienced this as well. And that was to me when I needed to raise my personal profile, to use my voice to show that gambling related harm isn't something that should be stigmatized or make you feel embarrassed. Until we start to share our stories as women, we then can break down that stigma and taboo that it isn't the majority men. There's just as many women out there. It's just the stats are not bringing people like me forward yet because I haven't used my voice to share my story. So that's something I'm very passionate about through my business, This Girl, to really focus on giving women a platform and safety to know that they can talk about that without judgment.
Absolutely. So important. I'd be interested to know, Bianca, how has your own personal health experience as a woman, how has that contributed to your gambling harms?
So I speak quite a lot about the underrepresented areas of gambling related harm for women. A lot of people speak about the obvious, which is the financial tragedies that come with it, and they are obviously equally as important. But for me personally, I struggled terribly with my weight because I didn't eat, because I would sooner sit in front of a casino. So I speak a lot more about my weight. I now have to wear glasses because of the amount of time I was spending in front of a slot machine. I know that I always had perfect eyesight, but watching something spinning for 8 hours non-stop is obviously going to have effects on my eyesight. So I now have to wear glasses. I think the biggest thing health-wise for me is the distrust and the effects it has on your mental health, keeping a secret and having to almost live a double life because of the shame. And I have used this analogy many times before, that if you look at other addictions that are equally as traumatic for those involved, they're very physical, Abby. So if you drank bottle after bottle after bottle of vodka for 8 hours straight, you would in effect be hospitalised, or, you know, even worse, you'd be dead. If you were a drug user and you injected yourself with heroin continually for 8 hours straight, the chances are you'd be dead or hospitalised. You could sit in front of a casino slot machine for 8 hours. The effects on your mental health are still the same because it's an addiction, but I could get him into my car, drive home and cook dinner for my partner and he wouldn't have a clue. So all of that mentally is affecting me in exactly the same way as any other addict would, but I don't have any physical symptom. And that's the harm that this horrible addiction can have on anybody, because it has no physical symptom. And that is what makes it so dangerous, because unless you ask for help, you can't get help.
With the women that you support, Harp, what kind of changes in their women's health do you kind of see?
So at the beginning of treatment, we always take a picture, kind of like as soon as they come through the door. And at the end of treatment, we do exactly the same. Now, what we see is, you know, we see a lot of people start going into kicking in with the health. So they lose weight. You know, the skin becomes more glowing. They start kind of physically looking after themselves. So doing the hair, maybe doing the nails. And it's not just the physical, it's the smiling, it's the laughing. It's that little bit of kind of hope back into their lives and the community that they kind of build together. It's those kind of changes that we see. Obviously, when you're here, we know that recovery it's a long time. It takes a long time, but just that little bit of a change in your physical self can completely change your mindset.
And Bianca, how about you? Like, in your recovery, what kind of changes have you seen to your women's health?
I think for myself, it was just the people I surround myself with, Abby. I think it's really important that to sort of mention that when you are in this cycle of gambling, it is literally all you think about. So you're constantly lying to people about ways to get money. And that cycle of who you become as part of that addiction overthrows everything that you stand for as a female, you know. And Harp, as you very rightly said, I didn't look after myself, whereas I used to love going to get my hair done, my nails done. But everything was not as important as gambling. So every penny I had, I would spend on gambling over looking after myself. My personal journey towards my own recovery, and I never classed myself as recovered, was having my babies. So I'm in my 40s, and I was very fortunate to get pregnant when I turned 40. And I think that purpose was the biggest shift in my own mental health, that actually I have two people now that it doesn't matter if I don't feed myself and sit in front of a casino slot machine for 8 hours a day, but I actually could be giving this money now to my children, and I don't want them to end up in the cycle I've ended up in because of changes I didn't make. So for me, a lot of my personal journey to recovery was based around me realizing that those people around me needed me more than I needed to be selfish to myself. And in doing that, it takes a lot of willpower. You know, I will not sit and say for 1 second that PTSD doesn't kick in. I can hear a song on the radio that reminds me of a feature or a noise that I'd hear in the casino, and it'll trigger me to think, or anything. I'd lie in bed at night and I can hear a song in my head of a game that I would play. But it's just changing that balance, changing your sleeping patterns, changing your mindset. Is not easy, and I never say that it is. But in time, you can learn to be in recovery, and that recovery then one day hopefully becomes recovered. But I always say you're never fully recovered from something, and you shouldn't have to be. You know, I champion my addiction now, and I champion my childhood trauma, but I share my story in a way to help other women, and not talk about myself as a victim. I'm not a victim of gambling addiction, and neither am I a victim of my childhood trauma. I'm a survivor of it, and I'm still learning how to be a better version of myself because of that.
That's really beautiful. I completely agree. Like, I always say recovery is a journey, not a destination. You know, it's ongoing. It's a lifelong process, and it's scary and it's full of discomfort, but it can also be really beautiful because of the kind of like life and the changes that you see because of it. Bianca, what would your advice be to women who are listening at home, perhaps? What would your advice be to them, like, regarding their health and gambling harms?
Every person's journey, Abby, is very personal to them. And I think, Harp, you've touched upon this. There is a reason why every single woman that I've experienced sitting next to in a casino or hearing or speaking to that have experienced gambling related harm is there are lots of ways out there that you can get help. But I think the most important thing you need to look at initially is just to help yourself. And for me, it was to read up and educate myself on some of the patterns of behaviour that I followed, because I was never confident enough to sit in front of my GP and actually say those words, that I have an addiction. We as women are too strong, we're too brave, we're too proud sometimes to want to stand up and say those things. My personal journey was based around me identifying my own issues before I actually got the help I needed, because what I've found, Abby, is that many women I've come across, and this has happened to me myself, if somebody is forcing me to go into recovery, or is someone giving me an ultimatum in my life that if you don't stop doing this, this will happen, I'm too strong-minded. I had to make that decision for myself to avoid going back and creating those patterns again. So do it for you first. Yes, do it for the people around you and the people that you love, but you have to want to make that change. But just make sure you make that change before it's too late.
Harp, what kind of advice would you give women listening at home? Advice about maybe looking after their own health in relation to gambling harms?
What I would say is a lot of people don't realise the physical and mental health impacts of gambling. And what I would say is that if you are gambling and you are questioning, is, is it out of control? Do I have gambling related harms? But you are seeing actual changes in your physical and mental health. Like, you're not looking after yourself, maybe like self-care. You may be neglecting things that you enjoyed doing before. Changes in your skin, changes in your hormones, your stress, depression. I would say, like, even anxiety and panic attacks. If you are getting these kind of physiological and mental health changes, then, I would say seek support. Equally, obviously, with the rehabilitation centres that we have for women, this is something we do focus on. So if you ever did need any kind of support, and you didn't feel that obviously you could do that in the setting that you are, we have this program that you can come out and spend the 6 weeks away from everything, and we can start looking at these things together.
How could people get in touch with your service, Harp?
So they could go directly to the Gordon Moody website, and on the Gordon Moody website, it will have contact numbers in regards to who you can like to obviously speak to our pre-support team, who are amazing, by the way, and they can obviously sit down with you, discuss the kind of support that we have, but they'll have a look at what you're going through as well, because what you're going through, even if you don't feel at that time that you're ready to come into this kind of setting, we do have shorter programs, we do have other support avenues that you can go down. So yeah, I would say reach out, definitely go onto the website.
And how about you, Bianca? How can people get in touch with this girl?
So my website is thisgirlcommunity.com. So I welcome anybody that wants to reach out to me via there, but there's lots of help and tools on there of other people that we work with that can help with all the different elements that we've spoken about. Or on Instagram, This Girl Community, same on TikTok, same on Facebook. So yeah, we're well on social media if anybody wants to reach out and message.
Amazing. Well, ladies, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your wisdom with me. It's been a great episode. Conversations like this are really needed, and the idea of shying away from our experiences only perpetuates more stigma and shame. As women, we deal with so much. And I'd like to finish on a quote that I heard. We are not clowns. We don't juggle or entertain. We find balance. If you have been affected by any of the topics covered in today's episode, please contact the National Gambling Helpline on 0808 8020133 for 24/7 support. And if you have enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to like, comment and share. You can find the New Beginnings podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts, and you can watch the episode on our YouTube channel, which is Bet No More UK.